Hi, and welcome to RealClearFetish Talks RealClearPlay, a podcast that dives into sobriety and kink and everything in between. This week we are on the sofa again in London, and we have Auntie with us. Welcome.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm all right.
Thank you for coming and doing the podcast with me.
That's all right. I'm looking forward to it.
Fantastic. So with every episode I do 4 standard questions at the start, and then we'll just see where the conversation takes us.
Yep.
Fantastic. What do you prefer I call you? Names, pronouns, and title?
I think, my pronoun is they. I'm a non-binary intersex trans femme, and all those things are important. And I prefer they because it just doesn't put me into sit me in one category or another, which is where I feel most comfortable. I think in names, it's like if I'm affectionate with a group of people, or if in a nice situation with people where people are asking for advice, then Auntie's a great name for me. And that's what I would encourage people to use if they met me in the street. If they were in the privacy of my own bedroom and were attending to my needs, then obviously they would call me Mom. If they were, going to the opera with me, then they would call me Kell.
So all about the situation. Just a
all
little bit.
About the situation.
Well, it is the same with me. If you know me really well, I'll be Rocco, which is used to be my pop name. I go by Sir. I even go by Daddy now, depending on the person, but it's not an age thing for me. It depends on the dynamic.
No, actually, because when I was in my late 20s, I had a thing going with somebody where they were in their 40s and I was in my late 20s, but I was their daddy. And they used to call me Daddy, and they used to say how it was really something they'd always wanted to do, but they weren't into much, much older men than themselves. This is obviously before I transitioned. And they really liked the fact that I was a 28-year-old punk boy that liked being called Daddy. And I find it very sad now on the scene, the way that on the sort of, certainly on the internet scenes, is this sort of idea that you're not allowed, you have to be in these age categories. You have to be, you're a twink, and the idea seems to be very much projected that if you're a twink, you also have to be a bottom, and then you are a twonk, I think it is, and then I think at one time there was otter as well. I don't know.
It's still there.
And then at some point when you're 40 or something, you graduate and be a daddy. And what it reminds me of is when I first came onto the SM scene in the very early 90s, it was very old guard. And there was this idea that the only legitimate categories were master or slave. And there was a generation of us that had started using top and bottom as a way of saying, no, we are into S&M, we just don't want to commit to 24/7. And this idea was that, if you were a master, you then had to do some sort of apprenticeship as a slave, even if it didn't turn you on in the slightest. So how you were supposed to understand, if you're not into bondage or giving up control, no amount of bondage and giving up control is going to teach you what it's like to be someone who enjoys being bondage and giving up control. There's no point in making people experience things they genuinely don't get off on. So nobody learns how to be a good master if they genuinely don't get off on being a slave. But that was the ideas of the time, and we were using top and bottom and saying, yes, some of us are in relationships, or we go in and out from different role play, or maybe we only do it on a one-off or two-off situation with a bit of negotiation. And so that was a top or a bottom. And I noticed, sadly, the sort of vanilla end of the fetish scene, I'm going to use those terms all very loosely, mostly I think through pornography online, you see the words top and bottom being kind of borrowed to stand in for some sort of aggressive form of fucking. And the next thing you know, that's what top and bottom means on the gay scene. And now you see Dom becoming lost in exactly the same way. You've got these guys who are basically into vanilla sex, describing themselves as Dom tops, which makes no sense, because if you're a Dom or a top, those things they're superfluous to have them together. And I've also had or seen certainly people referring to themselves as a slave, and they're basically into getting fucked. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with wanting to get fucked, but leave the words alone, because you have your own words. Slave has such powerful and important meanings for people right across the gender spectrum and sexuality spectrum, and to then reduce it to getting fucked is like because eventually there's going to be no more words left for us, and how are we going to self-describe? And I will also say, when I was in 1992, I did this for a period of time. I was somebody's puppy, but I wasn't a puppy with a mask on and knee pads. In fact, not disparaging anyone who does that now, but it was very imaginative. You know, I was a punk boy, and my partner, who was also my boyfriend and sometimes my sub, we played this game of like a boy and his dog. And so both of us played dom and sub roles sometimes in role, sometimes the dog fucked the boy, which is deeply problematic on some levels and yet actually worked very well for us. And the thing that was really funny, I used to smoke. The thing that was really funny was I've got this scar on my head, which when I had a Mohican was very, very obvious because I shaved my head. And I was in the London Lesbian and Gay Centre once at my boyfriend's feet, and somebody came up and asked why I was allowed to smoke as a puppy. And my boyfriend just turned around and went, "You see that scar on his head?" And they went, "Yeah." And he went, "He's a rescue dog. The ALF got him out of a beagle factory, and that's where the implant went in." And we just laughed, and at the same time decided that actually was quite a good feeling of it. So when kind of dog and puppy play came in again relatively recently, it seems to have been institutionalized in a very specific way, and everybody has to wear the right gear and look in the same way and do the same things and shave their bodies and be in a very formal sense of some role of master and dog or something. And I feel like the thing I liked about the 90s and those role plays we were doing was there was an incredible imagination involved. It didn't really matter what you were wearing. That didn't really signify anything. It's what you with your partner, one night stand or in a relationship, constructed and created between the two of you, which allowed me and him to do extremely kinky stuff some days, well, I suppose all days, but also to flip those roles and expectations. And that was great, you know.
Well, when I look at puppy play, how it is today, and I know it benefits a lot of people on the neurodiverse spectrum. It's a big thing in that community because it is a little bit like a security shield with the mask, and you don't have to interact in the same way. But when I started puppy play, which was maybe like early 2000s, it was not about the puppy hoods. It was very much a handler and a pup. There was no packs, nothing like that.
No.
So I almost categorize myself as almost old school pup play. And I see it works for a lot of people. A lot of puppies, it works really well for them. But for me, that's not the kind of puppy play I enjoy.
No.
But then again, there's all sorts of facets in different kinks.
The thing is, one of the things about that old guard scene that I sort of arrived at the very end of in the early 90s was it was absolutely riven with the most repressive rules about what you could and couldn't do, what you could and couldn't wear, how you were supposed to address each other and deal with each other, and, you know, who was allowed to be friends with who almost. And I'm really glad that's all been abolished because it was horrible. And I much prefer the kind of the widespread sense of the range of opportunities that people have to play around with. I suppose I just feel sometimes that what happens now is people become hung up on the clothes. And again, you know, I don't really have clothing kinks. I mean, I used to live in leather sort of between about 92 and 2005. I mean, I really did, you know, leather jacket, leather jeans, or leather trousers. Sometimes I didn't really wear a waistcoat, and I also had a 3-piece suit in leather. I used to have a leather suit jacket, leather waistcoat, and leather trousers with leather boots. And I would go to the Hoist on a Saturday night, and they would always have a moment where somebody would be like, "Well, you know, is it really a kink count to be wearing a suit?" I go, "Well, it's a leather suit." And they go, "Yes, but, you know, like, it's more like work clothes." And I say, "Look, you fetishize working class men's work clothes, you know, fluorescent gear, boots, hard hats. I fetishize middle class men's work clothes, suits. So you can have your fetishized work clothes, but I have a different work clothes that I want to fetishize because I'm a working class person, and it's so, you know, I'm not saying that working class people can't fetishize. I'm just saying the dynamics people have to recognize the dynamics are different.
I've definitely seen a tendency when it comes to leather nowadays where people go outside the box. I'm not one of those people. I have langlets. I like that gear. That's what speaks to me. But I do run into people where it's bright colors and designs I wouldn't have thought of. One of the previous guests on this season got a pair of leather jeans made that looked like 501s.
Wow.
So in blue with a white top, like undershirt, but in leather. And it was like, the stripy bits. And he got that made in leather. And the detail, you wouldn't know from a distance it was leather until you come up close. So people have great ideas, and there's no limitations what you can do with leather.
And I also, at the same time, as you can see, I'm not wearing any fetish gear at the moment. And I think for me also, there's always been a sense about how accessible, like if the kink scene is, or the SM scene, as I would call it, is gatekeeping, and it is often clubs are often gatekeeping through dress codes, then it means that if you're on benefits or you're in a working class low wage job or blue collar job, as they say in the US, you're being excluded. And that's not to judge anyone, but it does mean that if you want to go to, I don't know whether Darklands has a dress code, but I think it would be quite difficult to go to a lot of those places if you were wearing jeans and a t-shirt. Because actually some of us, like me, I mean, as I said, I lived in leather between 2003 2019, but mostly that was because, it did turn me on, but also I was a political activist within the SM community, and so to some extent wearing leather was like my work uniform. I think once that was behind me, I realized that it wasn't so important to me what I put on. What was important to me was what I did. I've always been much more interested in being a dominant and a sadist, which I love that word, by the way. I think it's a massively underused term, although I think there's actually very few of us that actually are sadists and masochists. I think that's...
like you mentioned before, sometimes the words, we use them too loosely, and then it kind of loses its meaning. I would say, if someone asks me what kind of dom I am, I would say I'm a soft dom, but I also have sadist tendencies. I definitely do enjoy having a flogger in my hand. I enjoy having a paddle in my hand, and I enjoy seeing the redness or the bruises afterwards. That's kind of my thing.
I like the fact that your fingernails grow by themselves and nipples are just there, and you don't even need to go to the shop to buy them. You can just literally use them.
I wish mine were connected. They're not at all.
Maybe this is a sign that I'm not a masochist, because mine aren't also connected at all, but they're very connected when they're attached to somebody else.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially when you see that pain on their face. Oof. My next question was, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
I'm 59, which feels incredibly ancient these days in ways that I'm sort of surprised by myself for being here. I lived through the AIDS crisis, and that in itself had I came out in 1981, just when the AIDS crisis started, and I spent the first 15-20 years of my life living through it, and with all of the things that involved. I was in ACT UP in London. I was the press officer for ACT UP London for 3 years, which was, it was hardcore. In your social and emotional life, you were going to hospitals and crematoriums and visiting friends, and then in your political life, you were lying down in the road and screaming about the fact that your friends were going to hospitals and things. And we had ACT UP had a weekly meeting every single month Thursday. So every single Thursday we had a meeting, and almost every week we had an action. And sometimes it was standing outside a building with a placard, and sometimes, like when we occupied the Australian embassy, it was in the middle of the dual carriageway, 3 roads around where the BBC is.
Yeah.
And that was pretty scary, I can tell you. 2:00 in the afternoon, being dragged across the street by a burly policeman is not as sexy as it might sound when you're a bit scared, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I think I'm very proud of what we did. I don't think we necessarily achieved huge amounts of changes in the law, but what we did do was we put ACT UP on World AIDS Day for 2 years in a row. ACT UP was the #1 item on the news stories, pushing Princess Diana to #2. And I think what was important about that was not that we pushed Princess Diana to #2, but that we showed people that there was ways to be angry, and that anger was a legitimate response to the AIDS crisis, because so much of the response to the AIDS crisis was about caring and nurturing and fighting for condoms, and all of these things were really important. But what wasn't there for so long, both before and afterwards, was a visceral response to the awfulness that was going on. And through that I met people in Amsterdam and Berlin and Paris who were also in ACT UP, and there was a kind of connections there. And then I also went to the States, and when I went to the States around the Spanner campaign, I also met ACT UP people there, and ACT UP New York was just so organised, and we were searching. I always felt like such an amateur in comparison, but they were huge. It was a huge organisation. In the 90s, I came out as a gay man in 1981, and I think, like a lot of people, troubled people, I was 15. I went to bars, and there was one bar in each town, and you went. Underage drinking wasn't a thing on the gay scene, and I started drinking when I was about 15 or 14. I used to go to school with a hangover because I'd been drinking in my house, and it was a way of dealing with the horror of the 80s, I suppose. And also, of course, complicated for me was that I'd come out as a gay man, but actually underneath it all I was a trans woman. And so, but there wasn't any options, or there wasn't any labels or access, or this whole concept didn't exist. So
there wasn't a language for it.
There wasn't a language, there wasn't a niche for it. I think in London there were some places you could go, but I was living in Leicester, and so
not a lot of trans activism there.
No. So essentially I lived as an extremely femme gay man. And I was 16 at one point, and 16 in those days, there were very few young people on the scene at that age. I mean, there's probably about 6 of us in Leicester, it felt like anyway. And so there was a lot of what I suppose is a kind of sexual abuse, really. You just sort of got passed about like a paper bag, and people never really cared about you very much. And drinking became a way of dealing with that. And I ran away from home when I was 17, and ended up in various different cities in the north of England. Some good relationships, but some really not, including one that was violent and abusive. And basically, I ended up in a detox unit at 23 in London, which was probably the most unpleasant experience of my life, because I was dying and I was 23. And most of the people that were in that unit were in their sort of 40s and 50s, and they were also dying, but they were not 23 and a screaming puff,
I'm assuming that also added like a layer on top, because I'm assuming the healthcare system didn't accommodate very well.
No, I mean,
gay people.
They didn't really accommodate gay people, and when they did, it was a complete fear of AIDS. So if you were gay, then AIDS was the crisis issue. And then, of course, all people's, and, lots of people, I think then, probably now as well, actually, lots of people who are manifesting some kind of alcoholism in that age group. Some of those people are people who are closeted gay men, and probably closeted trans women for that matter. Yeah. And that denial becomes self-hate or problematic behavior or whatever. And I was often the only gay in the village. Anyway, so I came out of detox, 23 years old, and I haven't drunk since.
Well done.
Which is 36 years on June the 10th. And I think one of the things it's not the only thing I'm really proud of, but it is one of the things I'm really proud of. And one of the things I also feel proud of is that when I talk to people who either are in some chaos with drug and alcohol or are sober, is to model a position to say, you can actually be a 59-year-old person who hasn't drunk alcohol for 36 years and have a nice time in your life. Because I think that's one of the things that's very difficult when you're in some degree of stress or difficulty with addiction, it isn't, and particularly if you're queer, it's very difficult to imagine being an old person. It's already quite difficult for gays and lesbians, particularly I think for gay men, with the cult of youth, to imagine being an older person anyway.
Yeah.
And obviously for trans people, younger trans people have a difficulty imagining old people because they think you're all everyone's dead. So like I hope what I model to people is that you can be an older trans person, an older queer person who is sober and who's managed to survive the whole AIDS crisis and multiple other episodes in my life and still stay sober. So yeah, that's one of the things I want to say is you can do this. I would say though, I did have some, obviously, I did have some other drug-related addictions along the way because, you know, in for a penny, in for a pound, isn't it? And also because, you know, we deal with our stress points, and if you can't drink, which is the human way of responding, you know, people have been drinking alcohol for about 10,000 years, you know, so, but I've been clean for 10 years now. So clean and sober. And I know you use the word clear, and I think that's a really good thing that I hadn't even thought about when you explained it to me earlier. And I do tend to use, and I suppose it's because when I was a lot younger, people I knew who were using drugs were heroin addicts. And for them, using cleanness was a way of distinguishing themselves from the dirty miseryness of their drug addiction background. But of course, the thing is, just like I was talking earlier about fetish gear and about daddy, master and slave and stuff, there is always class involved. You know, there is a reason why drug and alcohol services originally used to refer to cleanliness as the way of being sober, because of the dirty working class taking drugs and the.
Well, for me, when I started RealClearFetish, which was originally a Facebook group, which has kind of died.
I joined it, actually.
Yeah, it's died a little bit of a death. I still the group is still there, but
Facebook
is now our generation's MySpace, really,
yes,
at this point. And when COVID happened, then I moved over to doing the podcast. But when I originally set it up, it was called RealClearFetish. But then I realized, ooh, this has some negative implications because we have the HIV people where people always like, are you clean? So I was like, no, I can't use that word. And yes, a lot of people use the term clean for their addictions, and that's perfectly valid still. But I prefer using clear-headed.
I mean, see, that's what I thought I really liked when you explained that to me, because I think certainly, and it's very relevant, isn't it, when we're talking about S&M, you know, that one of the things that I think has been really powerful for me in my experience of being a dominant and a sadist is being clear-headed, not taking drugs, not taking alcohol, and being very, very present so that I can, you know, one of the things is it's a kind of turn on for me is that point when you've got someone at a point, you know, they're tied up and blindfolded, and you lean in and you listen to them breathing, and you can just tell from the way they're breathing and the sort of thing where they are in their endorphin hit or lack of endorphin hit. And that I find incredibly erotic. And you need a very clear head and a bit of silence. You know, if somebody was drinking or taking crystal meth, then you wouldn't be able to focus in that way. And you need that. And I think particularly when you do very intense kinds of play around domination or pain play or bondage, you know, sleep sacks and mummification or anything like that, you need to be really in the moment, listening to them breathing, because that is how you can feel what is going on in their head. And I've been doing S&M since 1984, which is, how long is that? 41 years. And, you know, obviously when I started off, it was pretty terrible. But, you know, now I think that idea of clarity, not only in relation to drugs, but in the terms of how I play, it's almost like a physical experience of being in the moment with the person, being present with the person. And I think sometimes when I see stuff online, particularly, there's a kind of fetishization of aggression and violence, which means that you're distancing yourself from them. And there's absolutely, I've done scenes where I've treated someone as the object. But even when you treat someone as the object, you are also paying, or you should be doing, is paying attention exactly to the person you're treating as an object. I remember once trying to describe the complications of being a dominant, and I was saying, the thing is, first of all, you've got to make sure the person's safe, and then you've got to make sure that they're turned on by what you're doing, and then you've got to make sure that you're safe, and that check in with their limits, and then to check in with your own limits, because all tops have limits. And then after you've done all of those things, then somehow you've also got to be turned on yourself.
Yeah.
And your being turned on yourself is the last on the list, not the first on the list. It isn't about, it is about you, but
it's also about them.
It's so much about them, because they make themselves vulnerable in as a gift. And it's like you have someone's consent, someone's desire in the palm of your hand like rose petals, and you need to make sure that whatever you do, they don't get damaged. You can smell that scent off the rose petals, but you don't crush them in real life. You might crush them in a metaphorical sense in some negotiated space, but they are rose petals in your hand, and that's the trust.
I really like that analogy. It's very beautiful.
I'm very fortunate around drugs. Fortunate is the strange word to use about this as someone who's clear and sober. I took crystal meth, who hasn't? But it didn't do anything for me. And I think it's because I'm on the ADHD spectrum. And so actually what it did was it just got very boring. So I took crystal meth at sex parties. I just was like, this is interesting. And then after a while I was thinking, okay, well, basically these people are having slightly rapey vanilla sex, and that isn't that very exciting. Or in fact, not even rapey, just vanilla sex. And I'd be thinking, well, this doesn't turn me on. So I would go home. I think if I was more like a lot of people are, if my brain clicked into the crystal meth, I could have seen myself in a really bad space. Mostly I've done downers. So, ketamine, methadone, alcohol. And I often end up doing them on my own, because then you control the circumstances and have a lovely time. Valium as well, actually. And I think in a way, given the way that chemsex culture has taken off on the drug scene and also through the SM scene, I'm lucky, because I didn't get affected by that. But I would say is in the early 2000s, when ketamine was the drug of choice, one of the reasons I think it became drug of choice is because of fisting, because it can really enable somebody who's into being fisted to space out and enjoy themselves. But I know from my past, trying to fist people while off your tits in a K-hole isn't very organised.
Well, that's where you don't have the connection.
You definitely don't have the connection.
No. You're somewhere else.
You're kind of like waving your hands in a cave, aren't you?
Yeah. So the third question, you've already answered it, but just to reiterate it: sober, clear-headed, or social drinker?
I would think my life has been, I've never been a social user of anything. It's like I was either full on or not on. So I spent a whole chunk of my life being not alcohol, that was very intense, 9 years, but kind of full on when I do things, and then eventually reaching a point which I'm really pleased about, where I just, you just one day wake up and you're like, well, you don't wake up. Lots of people didn't. I don't wish to either diminish my own sobriety, but also anyone else's struggle. I think alcohol is such a pernicious drug, and so many people find themselves where they might be sober, as in from any particular drug, or including smoking, and then they have a couple of drinks and it turns off the inhibition button, and then someone says, do you want a line or a hit or a shot or a toke? And because you've had a couple to drink, your ability to say no is so much weakened, because the alcohol is doing that. It being sober for 36 years means that if I want to do that kind of stuff, I have to manually switch that off. And that process of manually switching off means that a lot of the times I don't manually switch it off. I think, what? No, I don't want to do this. Thank you very much.
Well, that was what, like, when I became sober, there was a lot of anger around not being able to drink. I don't categorize myself as an alcoholic, but like you just said, have one drink, two drink, someone offers me a line, all that willpower is gone.
What, if I can ask you, because I don't know, so is your addiction issues around particular drugs?
Crystal meth, GHB, and methadone.
Oh God.
Yeah, that holy trinity of drugs. And then at the end of my using, I got into slamming as well.
Is that injecting?
Injecting, yeah.
You see, this is one of the things that I think is very interesting about language, is the way in which the gay men scene uses different words. Because I came from a background of 80s alcoholism and heroin addictions. I wasn't a heroin addict, but I hung out with them. I use certain kinds of language to describe what I'm doing. And on the gay men scene, I use that very specifically, particularly in the sort of 2010s, 2010s, all these words emerged, chemsex and chems and slamming, which are all words, I think, to distance themselves.
Oh, absolutely.
From injecting drugs or drugs, in fact. And one of the reasons why I'm mentioning this is because in 1990, when I was in ACTA, we produced a leaflet where on one side it said, if you have sex, and then it was very graphic, and it just said, if you have sex and you have a dick, put a condom on, and if you don't have a dick, use a dental dam. I mean, people might argue the toss about whether dental dams were ever actually useful or not, but at the time, that's what was important.
Yeah.
And on the other side, we had information on how to clean your works. And so very clear, and we gave them out at gay bars. And we used to get shouted at all the time by people who ran the gay clubs and from some of the HIV sort of workers on various different groups, because in their view, gay men didn't inject drugs. And it always felt like a kind of associations that gay men, people who used drugs were straight, homophobic and working class, and gay men were gay, obviously beautiful and having a lovely life, and middle class, aspirationally at least. So when the 90s and noughties came by and people were talking about chemsex and slamming, and I just found myself thinking, this is obviously now it would be ludicrous to say gay men don't use drugs, because that is one of the biggest crises that the gay men scene has. But the language of inclusion is about distancing themselves from drug culture, which is
it's romanticizing an act, and I definitely recognize when I came out, if someone had said, do you want to inject drugs, I may have thought more over it before I did it. But because someone said slamming, it didn't sound as bad.
If people referring to it as chemsex and slamming is ways that they can find ways to process it and get clean or clear-headed, I don't care what language they use.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think there are times when people don't interrogate those words to think of what else is going on here. And what I think else is going on is distancing from the rest of the drug culture when, and that, I don't think that helps. We can learn from mainstream drug culture.
Oh, I now, just getting blood tests can be an ordeal for me because it can be triggering. I had a year and a half ago, I had to have sedation for a colonoscopy. Fun. But at the time it seemed okay. But then a week later, I spent 3 weeks completely obsessing about being injected again. Because it's there.
Oh, yes.
The pathway is there. It may be a little bit overgrown, but it's still there. And that's something I have to live with, because as soon as you've done that once, it sticks with you. Some people have a horrible time and then they stay away from it. Thank God. But if you enjoy it, it's very hard to go back to normal using when you've stepped over that line.
I remember having some blood taken at a nurse, and she said, okay, let's see if would you like to use your arm? And I went like this, and she went, what are you doing? And I went, oh, I'm just bringing up the veins. And she just looked at me, and I was thinking, okay, that was probably not the right thing. And then I discovered that I've got a really big, fat, juicy vein on the back of my hand, which sadly you can't see as easily now because I've got a massive tattoo on there.
Yeah.
But that was great because then it didn't have to deal with this part of my body at all. I'd usually say, why don't you use a vein on there? And they would just think, oh, well, that's because it's an easier situation. But for me, it's because it meant that I didn't stray over into any questions about what was going on in my arm.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't have very many veins in my arm because I've ruined them. So yes, I think, but I, as I keep saying, it's like whatever gets us through is the things that matter.
Well, that's the thing with drug addiction and so on. Language is important. Empathy is important. It's about meeting the person where they're at. And I think that's really, really important. Like when I talk to people who either approach me on Instagram or friends of mine, I get to their eye level. And it's like, I need to meet you where you're at. I can't say you have to do this, because that's going to overwhelm you. And you might just run for the door. And that's not going to help anyone. Like my dad had the best reaction when I told him I was a drug addict. He was just like, well, I'm not going to be angry with you because that's not going to help you.
Wow.
But he'd been dealing with my little brother, who's like almost the black sheep of the family. He's lovely now, much more settled, but he'd been dealing with him for years. So he's just like, oh, you have a drug addiction? Oh, we can deal with that. That's fine. But he was very much like, you're going to sort it out. That's not a problem. I believe that.
My mum in particular she'll be like, I know that you've done drugs. And I'll go, honestly, mother, I haven't. And she'll go, you are totally ridiculous. I know that you've done drugs. And I said, do you want to know about it? No, of course I don't want to know about it. I just know that you have. And then I'll go, okay, well, I have then. And then she'll go,
and then she's over, like, she sort of gets surprised anyway.
She does it every time. She kind of pretends, or perhaps even is, sort of a little bit horrified that it's been confirmed, even though we repeat this over and over again. But I think that's something, when I say to people I've been sober, I've been sober 36 years, people are like, that's brilliant, that's the thing. And if I say I've been clean for 10 years, people are less outside of very specific circles. Mainstream society, what they get stuck on is the fact that they used to use them, not the congratulations for being clean. I mean, people obviously feel that, but it's more uncomfortable. And also, I suppose, because, people have very particular conceptions of what somebody who used to do drugs looks like. And one of the things that I've discovered in my life is that, I've had some mental health issues as well in my life. And people, if you are articulate, able to describe yourself with some degree of self-awareness, people just refuse to believe that you've either got mental health problems or that you used to have addiction issues, because that doesn't fit their idea of what those look like.
Yeah, you need to be someone sitting in the corner pulling your hair out.
Yes, or deeply problematic.
Yeah, something like that. Talking to walls or whatever, if it's really extreme. But like you, I'm very self-aware. So when I have my anxiety or feel a very low mood, I try avoiding using the word depressed, because I've been mildly depressed, but I've never been like proper depressed. But I'm very self-aware of it, and I can articulate what I'm feeling. But that can come off as like, well, you should be in bed and not being able to talk at all when you have mental health issues. I'm just like, well, no, that's not how it works.
No. Anyway, get to question 4.
What is ClearPlay to you, and why is it important?
So I spent 40 years of my life as a gay man, or in some sense of gay man passing. I still haven't worked out what the language means. A chunk of that time was a practitioner of SM. For me, it's like you meet somebody in a bar, in a club, or I presume through contact ads or through contact ads. Listen to me. How old am I?
I used to do chat rooms.
Yeah, Recon or Grindr or something like this. And you have a conversation. Then you meet them in person. And for me, ClearPlay is that from the moment you meet them, you are engaged with them and your brain is engaged with them. And that because your brain is engaged, clear-minded and clear, you can listen to what they're actually telling you about what they're into and not into. Obviously, some of this kind of reading the situation comes from having done S&M for 41 years. I don't imagine someone who's, just starting at sort of particularly sort of domination to be able to read the person in that sort of way. But paying attention to what they're saying, not having drinks to steady yourself, give yourself Dutch courage, but actually being really honest and listening about yourself and your desires as well as their desires. I think all of that is about being clear-headed. Also being aware that when you have a couple of drinks, you might show off a bit. You might try to impress somebody. You might say that you can do something you can't do, or at least give the impression that you can do things. You might end up promising things that you can't manage or that you've never done before. And that's how you end up making mistakes. Sometimes you make mistakes and the person you're playing with is fine with you made a mistake. But you could make a mistake that's actually quite serious, particularly if you're looking at things with bondage or breath control or fisting or whatever it is. If you get it wrong, you could do damage. And that could be not because you've been drinking or taking drugs in the actual scene, but because earlier on you had some drinks and you ended up saying that you could do something that you actually don't know how to do. Now, the thing is, we all learn S&M. It's like S&M is an endless apprenticeship. When I got back into fisting this year after a gap of 25 years, there was a point when I was, halfway up somebody, but I remembered that I hadn't done it for 25 years, and I sort of had to sort of step back for a second and say, wait a minute, what are you doing now? Don't take this so casually. Don't presume that you know what you're doing immediately, that you just can do this without thinking about it, because the person you're playing with is not an object. And that was something that I think, if I'd have been drinking or on some sort of drug, I might not wherewithal to step back and say, this is not casual. It's casual play in the sense that you meet them through, Recon. They come over, you do this, and they go away again. And hopefully you get to see them again if it works out. But sadly, that isn't the way modern sex culture works. So you can have massively intense S&M with somebody and then they disappear, just like you might as if you'd had a wank. But even then, you still have a responsibility to take what you're doing seriously. And I think I believe that we are more able to take people seriously and listen to what they're doing and they want and what they don't want on the moment that you're in, if you are sober, if you are clear-headed. It's the hardest thing, I think, is if you do something with somebody and it doesn't quite work, either because you don't really know what you're doing, or even sometimes you just, it's on paper, everything matches. You should be able to do this scene. It will do these kind of things. They've told you what they're into. You've paid attention. You know that they're not into this, so you aren't going to do that. And yet somehow it doesn't quite work. And I think when you're in drink, when you're, there's a tendency to maybe rush it or not apologize or not take responsibility for yourself, or just not stop when you are really sober. And I don't think it's easy. I think one of the hardest things about staying sober for all these years is being accountable of myself at all times for my actions. Because when we're drinking, that's one of the things we don't ever take responsibility for, either because we can't remember what it is we've done, or because we don't want to, because if you ask questions like, did I behave badly last night? They might tell you the truth and you don't want to hear the truth. I think you have moments where you are in an encounter and it doesn't quite work. And it doesn't mean the whole scene doesn't work, although that also happens. Something you're doing, and it might be, I think it's particularly where you do something which usually works for people, but you haven't specifically discussed it in advance, possibly because you hadn't even thought about it, and then actually it doesn't work for that particular person. And being sober, and I'm going to use the term in the general sense of the word, hopefully means you can see what you're doing and you can step back a little bit and go, actually, maybe I don't need to do that anymore. But I think if you were carried away on the emotion of a high, you might end up pushing, like this whole idea that a dom or a sadist job, a top's job, is to push a little bit beyond their limits. And sometimes that could be true, but a lot of the time that isn't true. What you're trying to do is play right up on the edge of their limits, but you're not actually. I think it's extremely dangerous for people, not as a general cultural idea, but I think you as an individual, to think that your job as a top or a dom is to push people past their limits. Actually, that isn't your job at all. Your job is to play if they want that. Some people don't want you to go anywhere near their limits, and that's fine. But if they do want to go somewhere close to them, you play right up to the edge. It's not to you to decide that today they're going to, do this, that, or the other. That's actually not your call. Again, I think if you're really clear-headed and really sober, then you can have a better chance of judging where you are in that little narrow category. But again, it's about listening. I suppose I'm thinking a lot about pain play, but also, some of the sort of humiliation, domination stuff. You're playing right up to the edge. And when you get there, it's an incredible high. And wow, it's amazing if you can lead someone along the edge like that. But you always have to pay attention. And the more intense it is, the more attention you need to pay.
When you're talking about, like, if you are playing with someone and you're high and so on, I've been in situations where someone tried to fist me and we were all high. I'd never really taken a fist properly. One of the guys got impatient and he just pushed through. That session ended very quickly. Thank God no damage happened, but I did bleed afterwards. And that's where...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you. It was not a nice situation.
No.
Because it violated the trust. Especially when it comes to fisting, you can't force it. If it's not going to work, it's not going to work. Then you just keep playing with the hole. I've definitely also fisted guys where I'm just like, I can't navigate your hole. Do you have a map? Either that, we'll have to stop because I have no idea where I'm going. Your ass is not going the direction I normally used to, and that's fine. That's the thing. You cannot force those kind of things.
Absolutely. And in the end, it can almost be frustrating because you want to do X, you know that if you are doing X, you will get turned on by this. And you believe that if you can get them to that place, they will be turned on. But actually, the truth of the matter is, you don't know that.
I think one of the most powerful things I've discovered, it's not always it works, or I always kind of like having the ability to go to someone honestly and earnestly, this is not working. Without it, it's not about them, it's not about me, it might just be a chemistry thing. It's maybe I can't read the person very well and I just don't know where to go. And do you know what? That's an honest thing. Sex is messy and it's okay to be messy, and it's okay when it doesn't fucking work.
I think for me, one of the other things is that once I got into doing SM activism and I started going to mixed sex parties and started playing with women and trans people, I had a whole different set of experiences because, I wasn't totally unprepared for bodies and behaviors. I was, I can't do it anymore because I have horrific arthritis, but I was on the straight scene. I was very well known for flogging and doing back play. I was very, very big into it. I would go to these. One of the great things about straight mixed clubs is they have lights on and they have proper whipping crosses and loads of room. Where if you go to a gay club like the Hoist or the Backstreet or whatever it is, and it will be darkness. You can't do a flogging scene to save your life in those places, and probably shouldn't. But I would go, and I was very heavily into flogging, and these middle-aged women who'd had 3 children and had pain thresholds out of the street, they would come up and say, oh yes, you're here, good, I want you to flog me. Because most of the straight men felt inhibited about hitting women very hard. And so they didn't get hit very hard. Whereas as somebody who's basically rooted in the gay scene, I didn't have that inhibition because the men I played with wanted me to hit them very hard. So I just applied the same thing. Only, of course, now it's playing with people who had significantly bigger pain thresholds. And so we had a mutually pleasurable experience. One club I went to in Birmingham, I arrived there about 11 o'clock in the evening. The club shut at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I spent the entire night just flogging people, almost all women, coming up and going, "Oh my God, I've watched you, and can you do me next?" And that was a fantastic experience. But I think if I'd have been inhibited or not paying attention, women are, not all, but relative to me, I'm not a very big person, but most cis women are smaller than me. Their backs and shoulders are smaller, you know. Areas of their body which you hit are smaller. You have to be more precise. And, you know, when I first did it, I would be, you know, at the time I had a boyfriend who was 6 foot tall and big, broad shoulders, you know, and he was very heavily into flogging as well. And so I started on this woman with the same way that I would have started on him. And I immediately realized that if I did this for very long, I was going to wrap around all over her body. So I had to be much more precise and much more finesse. And I think that's certainly something since transitioning, I've been much more aware of the degree to which my sexuality is now pansexual rather than sort of gay male or male focused. And of course, that does have bonuses because they're all different parts of bodies, which are now, I'm like, oh my God, I didn't realize I could do that, or you could do that, or whatever it is. But other times it's just about having the differences, and at times that can be really exciting, and other times it can be quite intimidating, you know, and I have to have the presence of mind to just say to people where I am intimidated, I don't know what I'm doing here. You're going to have to give me some clues.
When I've engaged with like trans men, I've always kind of like, I'm not averse to having fun with a trans man, but I also don't know how that part works. But that's fine. It's okay not to know that. Yet again, communication, body language, all that. Just figure out how it works together.
And also not being caught up with the dynamics of very single sex, cis ideas of gender and sex and practice. You know, like, yes, these parts of your body are parts of a body I don't have. So I've been very lucky. I've been with people who have been very forgiving. Mostly, I think, because I'm really honest. And so I've got to do things that previous, you know, younger version of me would have probably been quite horrified, to be honest. I think going down a trans guy, the first time I was quite intimidated by how that was going to work. And then when I did, I was like, okay, this is fun. Like, okay.
Oh, I have a friend saying exactly the same. So I loved it.
Yes.
I was just like, I'm very honest with that. I have no idea how I'm going to react because it's so foreign to me. But that's also okay.
Yes, because all of the kink, you know, like, I think it's different now than it was in the 90s. I think the sort of the internet and popular culture means that there's an awful lot of S&M stuff that's now been absorbed into popular culture, and you can go and find anything online if you want to. You know, in fact, you don't even have to try very hard. It's kind of there whether you want it or not, really.
Yeah.
But interestingly, what's there is always very curtailed by very particular categories. You know, if you want to find trans women on porn, you're almost always going to find one of two things, which is you're going to find trans women, post-operative trans women who are playing kind of a very kind of slutty, girly image, or you're going to find pre-op trans women who are into fucking straight men in a sort of pegging with a real penis way. There's no subtlety there. There's no one like me in that space because I don't feel like I fit into either of those categories. And I think that's true for a whole range of things, daddies and dockers and puppies and, you know, all the things we might be fisting for that matter. It's all very particular. In fact, some years ago, probably about 10 years ago, through Recon, this guy messaged me. He was in his, I think, late 20s. I was in my early 50s. Bad girl. And they wanted to explore bondage. And they read my profile and they were like, yep, you'll do. You seem to know what you're doing. So they came over to see me. I think they came from Mansfield or quite a long way on the train, you know. And I was thinking there were so many people all over the internet you could message who live nearer, but anyway, you know, very complimentary. And so I tied them up in multiple different ways. And after about an hour, they were like, I don't know why, but this doesn't seem to be working for me. And I was like, okay. So, you know, I untied them and, you know, we had a bit of chat about it. And I said, how did they feel like they got into bondage? And they said, oh, well, I've been watching bondage porn since I was 13 years old. Thinking, wow. I mean, that's not that unusual now. For me, that feels like wild. But then I started drinking at 14, so who am I to argue? And then I said to them, have you ever thought about the possibility that you're not actually into being tied up? Maybe actually you've been watching other people get tied up all this time in bondage, and maybe actually you're a bondage top. And it had never entered their head that watching other people tied up might actually be the thing that turns them on. And they went, so what would I do then? And I said, well, you would look at this porn again, and then you might message people who are into bondage and say that you would like to explore being the bondage top. And they were completely mind blown because they had never seen themselves in that role. Because the way the internet projected a 27-year-old man was that he must be somebody who gets tied up.
That's fascinating. And of course, that makes perfect sense. That is like, well, they're the voyeur watching this person being tied up. But yeah, it's interesting when it comes to bondage. I'm like, I have ADHD as well. So I think it's fun to be tied up, but then 5 minutes later, I was like, I'm bored now. Get me out. I did have a lovely session with one of my best mates in Berlin where he put me in a sleep sack with headphones on and just lied there. It was just zen, absolute zen. But then again, also when it comes to fetish, it's like there's periods in my life where I've been more into leather, and then I've been more into skinhead gear, and I've been more into this. I think it comes in waves where you're at in life as well when it comes to fetish.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly also feel like there was definitely a point in the 90s where I was very definitely leaning into the sadistic side. And a lot of the people I played with, we didn't even bother to do any kind of domination play. They would just turn up and then I would, you know, cane them across this part of the hand, which is extremely painful and not for beginners.
No.
But extremely satisfying. It took quite a lot of practice on pillows with lines on for me to be able to get exactly on that point so that didn't break their fingers.
Yeah.
But, you know, practice makes pervert. And
I like that.
And yes, so they'd turn up and I would cane them on that part of the hand, and, you know, we all had a great time. Well, the two of us had a great time. Nowadays, I think I'm much more orientated. I mean, I'm never not going to be a sadist, but my kind of interest is much more towards a formal domination. You know, I like almost a voyeuristic level of telling people to do this over there, watching them while they're doing various things. Much less physically interactive. And the power is the thing that is particularly kicking me at the moment. Kicking me? I don't have the words to think of it.
So in your little text you sent to me about like just a little bio about yourself, you mentioned that you write a column.
I wrote a column.
You wrote a column. Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Okay, so there used to be a pan-European magazine called Projet X. So in 1992, I set up the Spanner campaign, which was a response to the court case R versus Brown, which criminalised mostly sadistic and activities in Britain between consenting adults. It's still law. So technically, some of the things we've been talking about on this podcast are illegal, which is kind of bizarre. But what has changed since when I set the campaign up and now is the level of severity of the activities required for a prosecution has gone from about a love bite right up to something very serious. And we saw there was a doctor in Birmingham that had cut someone's ears off. I think you remember a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Well, he would be now the level of which the state considers it to
gravely bodily harm kind of thing. Yeah.
Imposing. Whereas when I set up the Spanner campaign, things like caning, plate piercing, that was all seen as prosecutable. And there were some attempts to prosecute people at the end of the 90s, which were mostly rejected by juries. And in the course of that, I also set up the SM-Pride March. And between 1992 and 2003, there was an annual march through London of leather fetish kinky people with banners and placards and drums. And it was brilliant. I mean, it's extremely provocative at the time. There was. And also, what's very funny, the first one we did, it was the first time most of us had seen each other in daylight in our gear. It was not very common at the time for people walking around outside very small areas of gay ghetto land. It was very unusual to see people dressed in leather in the street. And certainly to be dressed in rubber gear was certainly something very odd indeed. And it was very provocative, and it was brilliant. It was a lot of fun, and we had a rally at the end. And for about 4 or 5 years, we did it jointly with SM Gays, and we had Dungeon in the Sky. Every year I would do a speech at the end. I don't know whether or not people got fed up with it or not, but I used to do the speeches anyway, making links politically between what we were doing. Kiki, who was, I don't know if he's still alive, and if anyone knows where Kiki is, he was French, he lived in Paris, and he was a rubber guy, and he's watching this podcast. Please, could you ask him to get in touch with me, because I would love to see him. Anyway, or if he is no longer with us, I would like to know. But anyway, he'd started this radical, kinky, or SM really, skinhead magazine in 3 languages, French, English, and German. So what Projet X, I think it was produced by a company called Agenda, but it was known as Projet X. There were lots of skinhead pictures and filth and toilets and pissing and, sort of gratuitous sort of stuff like that. And they had articles and contact ads and general disgusting shit. And Kiki came to London and stayed in my flat, and we got into a conversation about the fact that I would like to write, and he asked me if I would write a column because he wanted me to write something more political. Most of the magazine was sort of, filth and pornography, and then I wrote a column called Kell Ethic, which was I did one column about the lack of disability access to the kink scene, and I did another one about scat play, and I can't remember them all now. And people all over Europe and North America were reading this magazine because it was completely different to Drummer and the sort of leather, gay men, American leather stuff.
Yeah. Partly
because it was extremely visceral, and also because it had political content which was not American. So I wrote that column for, I can't remember how many years it was. It got very controversial. I wrote a column about how the skinhead scene in Europe had begun to use white laces to say that they were into hard, rough sex. But at the same time in Britain, white laces were a symbol of fascism. The fascist boys wore white laces. And because I was provocative, I wrote a column calling out the gay skinhead movement in Europe for not recognising the complexity of this. I may even have been a bit more blunt than that. Probably I was very fierce in those days. Anyway, it was deeply controversial. Questions were asked in, I can't remember, the Belgian Parliament or the German Parliament about skinheads with white laces. I got hate mail from the communists because they said I was behaving like a fascist, and from the fascists because they said that, as in fascist gays, saying that I was being a communist, basically. And I didn't write a column for about 6 months. And then I finally wrote a column where I talked about having had sex with a Nazi and how I hadn't known he was going to be a Nazi until I got home, and how I'd ended up having sex with a Nazi, and how deeply compromised I'd felt about this, particularly as an anarchist. And then not long after that, Projet X seemed to collapse. And I think that it coincided around the beginning of blog culture and gaydar and the internet and World Skins, World Punks, which became later on Recon.
Yeah. Oh God, I remember what it was called that.
And so I think the shift moved from paper magazines and journals, and the sort of early internet stuff, IRC particularly, into a more fixed blog culture and also into much more national groups. So, Recon, as it was called then, was very much English language. And though lots and lots of German and French and Italian people had profiles on Recon, I'm not saying it was only English language, it felt like it was becoming much more separate.
Yeah.
There was the thing about Projet X, which was really exciting, was that people were reading it in Amsterdam and they were reading it in Rome and Helsinki and London and also in New York, and it had a pan-national feel to it.
Yeah.
And what I brought to it was an anarchist perspective, which was definitely not part of mainstream gay S&M culture at the time.
No.
And also one year there was a leather Mr. Drummer International did a Mr. Drummer Europe competition in Amsterdam.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And I was a judge, and it was an absolute hoot. They had us on these massively high chairs, and there was me and the editor of Drummer at the time, who was a lesbian at the time, a lesbian SM Dyke, and she and I were doing a pair, and then there were three other pairs of people. And they had, they had the different rounds which they had, and we had to give marks out of 10. And the audience in the debate was basically the assorted gay men, leather gay men of Europe were there.
Yeah.
And one of the high points for me was Mr. Italy came out, and he sang Nessun Dorma. And of course, at the time, we're talking about the 90s. The gay men in the audience were all just absolutely cheering the fact that he'd just sung Nessun Dorma. And me and Skeeter, I think it was Skeeter, we gave him a 10. And the guy who was from America, who was doing the compare, was completely confused by the fact that this man in his imagination round, which is sort of, and you've probably done these, you have done these things.
Yes, I am previous Mr. Leather Europe.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm such an idiot, aren't I?
It's fine.
So you have the round, you have the three rounds.
Yeah.
The middle round is that kind of imagination scene, which is quite often a sex scene.
Yeah.
And this guy came out and did an opera aria, and we just thought this was the best thing ever.
Oh, absolutely! It's canvas tits, but it's fantastic.
Canvas tits, and it appealed to the audience in a beautiful way. But the guy from Mr. Drummer from America was totally nonplussed, because that's not what he was expecting. And when he turned around to the audience, and you could see by the way his language was, he was expecting the audience to be on his side. And then he said, "So, what do you think of that then?" And the audience went wild. And he just looked like,
bemused by it, yeah. Well, most of the American titles don't really have a fantasy round anyway. It's very pageanty. And if any leatherman says it's not, it is pageanty.
Well, I think the other thing that I wrote a column for a drummer actually afterwards about the whole experience, about what the fuck was that about? Basically, saying that wasn't how it felt, like an American idea that was being imposed on Europe, because that whole idea that you would go to your local leather club and you would get sponsorship and they would fund some sort of national tour of going around charity works. We didn't have the same idea of charity in that way, because we had socialized healthcare and a social state, and often most European countries, there was a very different political culture to do with charity works. Yeah. Whereas in America, where particularly in the AIDS crisis, it was people, these pageantry, these sash wearers and the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence were literally paying for people's hospital funds, so I got it. But at the same time, it felt like I think I may have even described it as American cultural imperialism, sort of arriving in Europe and this sort of idea. And of course, now there's Mr. this, Mr. that, and Mr. the other. There's a leather and rubber and pups and boot blacks and
sports gear,
everything, and in exactly the same pageantry way and sash wear that there is in America. And it's not my scene. It makes people happy and it's fine. I do feel like at times it feels a bit like when I was talking about porn categories. There are certain kinds of men that seem to win those categories. I like, at the moment, there's the man who is Mr. Rubber. I don't think he's called Mr. Rubber. I think he's Rubber something. Sadist. He's in Spain, and he has he has like long hair down to the middle of his back.
Yeah.
And he has a very different sort of image, and he wears a lot of colourful rubber, and he makes it himself. And I really like that, because so much of the rubber fetish scene is men with short hair with certain kinds of muscle bodies, and they all seem a bit interchangeable. And sometimes I feel as if you could take the head off one and put it on another, and nobody would notice any difference.
Polly Pocket.
Which is a terrible thing to say, and I apologise to all those people who are those things, but there is a lot of that. And whereas I feel like there are very few opportunities for outsiders to become part of the scene. But anyway, the thing about this Mr. Drummer was not only did some of our European colleagues surprise everybody, but when the voting came up, the man who won Mr. Drummer Europe was the photographer for Projet X.
Oh.
And of course that meant that the man, whoever was the CEO or the whatever the level they were of Drummer, had to give Mr. Drummer to his main competitor. And we didn't mean it to be like that, but the irony and the amusement was great. But now I don't think that would happen. It's not that wouldn't happen, but I don't know enough about, because to be honest with you, I've never been much of a magazines person. But I don't feel like there's that much competition now, partly because it's all online, isn't it? I don't know if you might know better than I do, but I don't really pay attention to sort of the magazines, or either online or offline.
I don't think really magazines is done very much anymore. It's more like if you pick up Boys magazine in a bar in Soho, it's all commercial.
Boys is still going.
I haven't looked, to be honest, but I'm assuming it is. It might still be there. I might be wrong. Don't quote me on that. So just to round the episode off, and it would be weird if I didn't ask this question. So how do you feel your fetish or kink life has changed from being, like you mentioned, an effeminate gay man to now non-binary, intersex, trans woman? How do you feel that's changed for you?
Well, one of the things is that this is something I do want to. It's more complicated because I don't know where exactly I would go. Obviously, there were no gay bars. None of the gay clubs or events I could go into. And I don't think people would really know what to do with me, even if I did. I went into the King's Arms about 3 years ago. I was just in the neighbourhood, and I popped in for a glass of water or tonic water or something. And I immediately knew exactly the role I was occupying, which was nobody said a word. I mean, nobody said a word. Nobody looked at me particularly. Obviously, no one's going to cruise me because we're in a gay men's bar. And I knew from having been as a gay man in that bar that people would be like, oh, look, she doesn't know it's a gay bar, or it's like I just didn't fit in anymore. And I wasn't part of that. All of that cultural, all of the lessons in how to pick somebody up, or how to chat someone up in a lift, or how to pick someone up on a tube train, for instance, which I was moderately good at. Well, you can't do any of that, because when you're a woman, you've got to be doubly careful. First of all, because straight men and straight women, or women and men, there's different rules to how they behave. And also because there's that kind of trust that gay men have, that you can just pick someone up at a bus stop, go back to the house, have sex and leave again, and everything will be consensual and everyone's on some sort of equal basis. Obviously things happen that are not good, but there's a kind of general sort of understanding. Well, that doesn't exist between men and women in anywhere near that way. Also, I have bonus organs. So even if I did manage to, I went to a wedding last weekend, and the doorman, the security guard, was rather hot, and he was cruising me in a very obvious way. And I thought to myself, if I'd have been in my previous existence, I would have had a go at picking him up and taking him back to my hotel room. But this time I'm like, well, first of all, he's a man and I'm a woman. So how's that going to work? His expectations of what I'm going to do, he might be thinking that I'm going to play a particular role in bed. Now, it could be that he's some, deviant sadomasochist, but the chances are that he's not. And the chances are that if he's reading me as a trans woman, he just assumes I'm a bottom, because that's when you're on Grindr or anywhere like that. If you are a trans woman on any of these, you just get messages all the time from straight men who assume that you're a T-girl and that you want to be...
Lady Grinder, as it's
basically
quoted.
And the idea that you might be a dom or a femdom is so beyond their capacities that they don't have any idea. But also, let's say I did chat this guy up, but let's say he was into it. I still have to, at some point, within like a few sentences into the conversation, explain my physiology to him, because I don't want him to get back to my hotel room and have a panic attack that he's having sex with somebody with a dick, because he might feel like that makes him gay, and he may not feel like he's gay, or it may not be, he may be some deeply closeted gay man. I mean, there are multiple things. It's too dangerous for me to risk any of those situations. But I have a Recon profile. I mean, I've had a Recon profile since 2000, when it first started. It used to be MxPervert, which is what I used in IRC. And about 2 or 3 years ago, I changed it to MxPervert. And when I did, I noticed that I lost about half of my favourites and friends. Because I guess if you're on a gay men's website and somebody is now identifying as, let's say, a woman, that's not what people are into. But I have got new people who send me messages, not always with the same blunt gay male scene way that isn't always what you want. But, it's there. And on Grindr, which is another place I use, and, there is quite a lot of bisexual men on Grindr who are more than thrilled about the idea of subbing to a trans woman. So, but I haven't really gone and explored the heterosexual stroke non-gay S&M scene particularly. It's something that I'm kind of gearing myself up to, because I do want to try that. But, all of my previous encounters on the straight SM scene, I did as a gay man. So I was kind of there behind glass. I was observing it all, but I wasn't really engaging with people. Now I have to try and engage with the dynamics of male, female, or man, woman, or whatever the fucking words we're going to use here. Contacts, and I'm not yet sure how I do that, and I don't know enough people who do that to ask too many questions. So it's like I will do that, and also the thing is, to put a finer point on it, I am also 59, and I'm a lot less brave than I used to be in these situations, and I get knackered as well. So do I want to spend £25 to go to a straight fetish club and navigate that environment? Not on my own. No, I probably don't. But, I'm still the person I always was, so going out to clubs at 15. So there's also, what's changed is I've discovered that gay men and bisexual men are quite happy to have SM sex with me. So now I'm beginning, after 7 years of not having sex at all, because I was dealing with my gender and the new different hormones and how my sexuality worked, and living in a very transphobic environment.
Yep.
And being constantly questioning myself about whether or not I should even be in certain situations. At Christmas, somebody that I used to play with, actually, about 10 years ago, just messaged me on Recon and went, can I come over? You've changed, but you've not changed. Can you come over? And we had very hot sex. And I thought, well, these are my people. This is the community I understand. I may not be a gay man, but I understand gay male sex culture really well. So why not stay where I am and be being that person, since it seems that actually isn't such a dead space as it might have been.
Yeah, and you mentioned like the transphobic climate here in the UK, well, everywhere, to be honest. It's very upsetting.
What I would say, though, and I think is really positive, is that when about 15, 20 years ago, I never thought ever that the gay men's scene would be opening and welcoming to trans guys. because gay male culture at the time was obsessed with cock. I mean, to a large extent, still is obsessed with cock.
Of course we are.
A certain kind of cock as well. And I could never see how that was going to work. But actually, trans guys have been really, particularly on the leather scene, have been really well absorbed into the community. And I particularly noticed it on the leather scene. And I think you see as well that trans women have also been accepted within the leather scene as well. So it's like the section of the population which sometimes gets quite a lot of shit, sort of, cis gay men are, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
Actually, to me, they seem, there's, on the leather scene anyway, there's actually an awful lot of acceptance. And that's really what I've always felt about the SM scene and the leather scene, is that, because we do quite unusual sexual practices, we have quite a tolerant and accepting way of dealing with people. So long may it rain.
I think in the last couple of years also the leather scene has dealt with its own toxic masculinity as well. There is definitely, I'm not saying every scene has its bad apples and people are stuck in the past and stuff like that. I've definitely run into people like that. In general, I think we've kind of broken down, even I've looked at some of my practices, what my language is, because I think in my start 20s, if someone said vagina, I would go ew, because that was what we did. It's like, oh no, that's a woman thing, we wouldn't touch that. Where now that I'm in my 40s or start 40s, I question things and it's like, oh, maybe it's not as binary as I thought, my sexuality. I am very much a gay man. That's how I identify. I use the word queer as well. I know a lot of people, some people have really big issues with using that word. But then again, as long as you respect each other, and if that upsets someone, then don't use that word around them.
Yeah.
Because there comes a lot of trauma with that word, where the younger generation has reclaimed that word. But yeah, when it comes to the trans community, I feel I'm very proud of the leather community. We really just like, no, that's the vulnerable section of our community. There's no LGB without the T.
And I think it is sort of the gay men's leather scene has been massively, it has been across Europe actually, has been massively inclusive in ways that people don't see. I think partly because the gay men's leather scene is quite small, in comparison to mainstream gay events. But I think the other reason why the trans community and the gay men's leather scene, or the leather scene in general, have a clear, is that we are both under attack from the same section of the gay men's community, gay and lesbian community, who want kink out of Pride, and they want trans people out of the bars. So we both know what it's like to be on the receiving end of disapproval from people who really should just need to fuck off.
And with both things, the argument, think of the children.
Oh,
I was like, oh, why are children even at the Pride parade? And there are family-friendly prides, and that's great. Do that then.
One of the reasons why we go on the Pride marches is because the family has told us that we don't belong. And now people want to turn around and go, yes, but your Pride should be family friendly. It's like, well, hang on, sweetie, hang on. You told us we weren't part of the family, and now we suddenly have to keep obeying this family. You can't have it both ways.
No.
Either, give us one thing or give us the other. And actually, I don't understand this regressive intolerance that's taking place towards the SM scene, because in the 70s and 80s, and certainly so many people who were involved in lesbian and gay rights, gay men's rights, particularly in the 1980s, the activists were also on the SM scene. Mark Ashton, founder of Lesbian and Gay Support the Minors, was kinky. Derek Jarman, kinky. These people, the kink scene in the 1980s were absolutely on the front line of lesbian and gay rights.
Yeah, some of the newer generation, and I don't want to generalize, but newer generation of gay men and younger LGBT people, because they don't have that connection to that history, they forget. And yeah, some people don't want sexuality in their faces, and that's more about them than it is about the situation. But then again, people are not having sex in the street when we're marching in a Pride parade.
No.
We're just, some might have an ass out, but that's it.
We used to have I mean, when we did the SMPride marches, which were amazing, we used to, by about the late 90s, there would be, because one of the things about the Spanner campaign in SMPride, it was mixed sexuality. And there used to be the pony boys, which were, there were some people who turned up and they had pony carts, and they'd have, there was one person who had a male horse and somebody else had a female horse. I don't know what their genders really were, but that's what they perceived to be, in full gear. And they used to lead the SMPride March through the streets of London, these half-naked people on a pony and trap with somebody sitting there with a whip. It was absolutely fantastic. And then other people would be saying, how is that going to win people round to our cause? And we would go, who cares? Because we don't have to be apologising for who we are. This is the kink scene. This is S&M, and I'm really tired of appeasement. One of the things I'm so proud of the trans community recently is people are doing direct action and standing there with their tops off going, go on then, pick. If we're men, then you're not going to arrest us because we've got our top off. If you're going to arrest us for having our top off, then you're saying we're women. That kind of, we will not appease these kind of draconian attitudes. That's what SMPride was rooted in. And that's what, when I see a bunch of poppies with their masks, and their rubber gear and their thing on a Pride March, they might not be my thing, but I'm really pleased they're there because it's provocative and it's saying, no, we're not putting up with some kind of narrow suburban white Christian homosexuality, really.
Especially the climate at the moment, it just seems like we go 2 steps forward and then 3 steps back. And
I think we go 2 steps forward and 1 step back, because I think that even when the state, through the courts or the justice system, seems to be quite reactionary, the actual populations, the people living in these countries, seeing more alternatives and engaging with each other and finding out that actually their mate at school was trans or is into leather or is a puppy or, likes to be, led around on a lead, or all of those things. And that's common, that's sort of in the popular culture. And so whilst, governments, whilst I imagine Keir Starmer finds the idea of, somebody being in a puppy mask at Pride absolutely horrifying, thankfully we don't have to live in Keir Starmer's house,
Thank God for that.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank God for that. To round the episode off,
yes,
if someone's listened or watched and they've really connected with something you said, where can they get a hold of you?
Right. On Instagram, you could find me on i.am.anti with a TIE .kell, Kel. And if people want to talk to me on Recon, I'm on MxPervert.
Fantastic. And if there's a single piece of advice you would give to someone, that being either on the kink scene, the SM scene, or just coming out as trans?
Oh my God, a single piece of advice. I think the thing is listening to this. If it's about the SM scene, I think it's about paying attention to the person that you're with, whatever role you play, paying attention and being present so that you don't deny either their agency, but also you don't deny yourself the experience. And for trans people, I would say, believe in yourself. And for people who are struggling with sobriety, the thing I would say is you can live to be 59 and be sober for 36 years and your life will be better.
Amen to that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming on to the podcast. It's been absolute joy and we've run way over time, but you know what? Sometimes that's needed and you have so much to say and it's really been an enjoyable conversation and listening to your stories and your experience, strength and hope, if you can use that saying.
Yeah, I'll go with that.
Yeah, that was this week's episode. It's been absolute joy to talk to Auntie and I'll see you in 2 weeks' time and go out and be kinky, be communicative and be safe. Go on, flog
fun.
Go on, flog someone.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Go and flog someone else.
Bye.
Bye-bye.